Okay, I wanted to knock out this quick video. I wanted to do it yesterday when it would have been definitely a little bit more appropriate. Yesterday was July 11th, and it was what would have been the 75th birthday of John Lawton, singer for LUCIFER'S, URIAH, HEEP, and various related and offshoot type projects. I had wanted to do a video a few days ago when I heard about his death. I believe he died on June 29th. So yeah, he was really close to his 75th birthday. And his birthday is the day after mine, which is July 10th. And of course, my favorite singer, Ronnie James Dio's birthday is on July 10th. And I often heard some similarities between Dio and Lawton stylistically, and there are some synchronicities surrounding the two of them, which I'll get into briefly later. But I had no idea that their birthdays were one day apart. Ronnie Dio would be Ronnie Dio would be 79. Yeah, he's been dead for 11 years. He was almost 68, or just 68 when he passed. 2010, 68, yeah. So, wow. So he would be 79. Wow, that's insane. He was born in 1942. So John Lawton was born in 1946, and he had kind of a long and interesting career. I've been a fan of his, I guess, since the mid 80s. One summer, when I was out of school for the summer, I went to a local comic book store that had a pivotal role in my life called Comics Enough Said. And they sold not only comics, but also adult magazines, skin magazines, men's magazines, what have you, girly magazines. I don't know what they were called back then. I heard all of the terms. Porn. Anyway, softcore porn. Anyway, so they carried that. They also carried music. They carried a few cassettes and a number of vinyl record albums. So I did buy a couple of cassettes and a couple of record albums, and one I bought was URIAH HEEP, Innocent Victim. And I believe I already had URIAH HEEP's Demons and Wizards on cassette, and maybe also Magician's Birthday, because I was collecting cassettes back then. But I snagged up Innocent Victim because, I wasn't fully back into slowly collecting vinyl, which I should have been doing all along instead of wasting money on cassettes. But this is the first time I'd come across this. A bit of a different lineup than the two albums I just mentioned. So I wanted to check it out, and I was really wanted to hear anything by URIAH HEEP at that time. And over the next few months between Comics Enough Said and I picked up several of their albums on vinyl at a place called the Wax Museum, which is mainly known for oldies and surf music, early rock and roll, soul. And they had a pretty good rock, obscure kind of rock album selection. And later I even bought Desmond Decker's version of You Can Get It If You Really Want on a 45 single there. And my ex-girlfriend bought some Martin Denny albums on vinyl with this big exotica phase. So anyway, but Innocent Victim was my first URIAH HEEP on vinyl, and yeah, I immediately fell in love with Lawton's voice. It did remind me a bit of Dio, and I think the album has some basic, rock and roll kind of songs, and then it has some kind of balladry here and there, all very soulfully sung by Lawton. But there's three epic tracks that I believe Ken Hensley wrote by himself, though I could be wrong. Ken Hensley wrote the majority of their stuff back then. When David Byron was in the band, I believe he wrote a good amount of material. He was the original singer. But, it was really Ken Hensley's band from 69, 80 when he left for good. He's jammed with them a number of times live since then, but he never rejoined the group. Of course, he passed away last year, I believe. So that's a big loss. Because Uriah Heep was really his brainchild. He was in a group called, oh my God, this group had a crazy name like Sex Machine or something like that. I don't know. And they did one album, but it was kind of weird psych prog, maybe 1968 album. I downloaded it somewhere. But anyway, he joined up with some other cats. It's kind of a revolving door rhythm section for a while. You had a lot of guys from the Keith Hartley band and such. But Mick Box was always his guitarist, and Mick Box is still the guitarist for Uriah Heep today. He's the only, not only is he the only original member, but he's one of the only living key members, because most of the key members over the years have passed. It's pretty amazing, kind of sobering, and most of them that have died in the millennium, just in the last 10, 15 years. So the lineup on this album was Innocent Victim. Was David Byron had left. I think he had some alcohol issues. He was a very kind of extreme, kind of diva kind of guy, a hard partier, I believe. And I always wondered if he was gay. It doesn't really matter, but it'd be kind of interesting to find out. He was very flamboyant, and I kind of wondered, in a way would make a lot of sense to me. And I'm in a way making more interesting to me, because rock and roll, hard rock, and heavy metal were so macho for so many years that, when Rob Halford came out, it was like a gigantic revelation to metalheads. I mean, to me, I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I mean, but by that time, I was not a metalhead per se, and I might be more of a metalhead now than I was in the 90s, late 90s, I guess, when Rob came out in Advocate magazine as homosexual. And, of course, Freddie Mercury was outed, when he died, because he revealed the day before he died that he had AIDS, and he had apparently contracted it through unprotected sex. So I always wondered about David Byron. But anyway, David Byron died later. I can't remember what year, but he was out of Uriah Heep, and I don't think he did anything else musically. He had a very distinctive voice. He was obviously very influenced by Ian Gillan, just as Ken Hensley was very influenced by John Lord. I mean, Uriah Heep was very much a Deep Purple kind of band. They weren't founded a very long time after Deep Purple, maybe a year and a half. And Deep Purple had said that their sound they were going for was Vanilla Fudge. And yeah, Vanilla Fudge is definitely kind of at the top of that branch of the rock family tree. And then comes Deep Purple. And then there's like Uriah Heep, and then there's a bunch of other groups that emulated that kind of Hammond organ, heavy guitar, vocal style to varying degrees of success, critically and artistically and commercially. So Uriah Heep was near the top of the heap, though, so to speak. Well, they were very prolific. They put out at least one album every year, if not more, studio album from 69 on. And the first couple of albums, they were really more of a prog rock band, just as the first three Deep Purple albums, they were more of a progressive rock band. But and there weren't many progressive rock bands in existence then. It hadn't quite codified as a genre. I mean, in 69, the genre kind of became codified with King Crimson, in the Court of the Crimson King, their first album. So they're kind of the godfathers of prog. But there was already Procol Harum, Jethro Tull, Deep Purple, and then here comes this next wave of kind of proggy bands, and Uriah Heep was one of them. And Ken Hensley wrote the majority of things. He did some of the lead vocals. He played rhythm guitar. He played all the keyboards and organs and synthesizers, piano, and he also wrote most of the music, almost all the lyrics. He wrote the liner notes to the albums, and he was just kind of a creative madman. He had this kind of idyllic, hippy-dippy kind of philosophy in his lyrics and in his delivery when he was speaking to his audience via the liner notes, the albums, and he really fostered the group. And I think, again, there he was influenced by John Lord, because in my mind, John Lord was very much the leader of Deep Purple originally. Richie Lightning, by the time Ian Gillan joined, Richie Blackmore had definitely taken over that role and never relinquished it until, finally they parted ways for good in 1993, which I think was definitely for the best for Deep Purple. Richie, I guess if you're a Blackmore's Night fan, it was the best for Richie too. I liked some Blackmore's Night, quite a bit of the medieval stuff. I strongly disliked their covers of songs that Richie wrote with Deep Purple and Rainbow. I did not like Candace Knight's attempt to emulate, well, not even attempt to emulate, but almost an embarrassing attempt to somehow improve upon Ronnie James Dio and David Coverdale. She just doesn't have it. And you can tell her heart is not in it, and she may kind of vaguely resemble Stevie Nicks, but she doesn't have Stevie Nicks's authenticity, in my opinion. And she's Richie's wife. She's been his wife for a while. Anyway, full circle back with this Deep Purple URIAH HEEP thing. So the first couple of URIAH HEEP albums have this kind of aura around them. And then they phased into a little more hard rock. I think picking up a cue from Deep Purple with Deep Purple and rock when Ian Gillan the first studio album of Ian Gillan in 1970, which was really like an early heavy metal album, proto-metal album. And, by URIAH HEEP's like third or fourth album, their guitars were a lot heavier, denser. Mick Box was very, obviously he'd been listening to Richie a bit, and then Ken Hensler was doing a good bit of guitar, a lot of crazy slide guitar. And, David Byron was just out of control with the vocals, with the falsetto and the wailing high pitch. He didn't have the control of Ian Gillan or the serious. I was going to say sobriety, but that would be a bad pun, I guess, on him and Ian Gillan and how much they drank over the years. But he wasn't quite as sober. He wasn't quite as somber, as serious. I don't know if I want to say serious. His work doesn't seem as focused. He didn't have the muse that Gillan had, and still has to an extent, even today. Gillan's like a towering figure, but even among lesser hard rock vocalists, they all had their moments of inspiration. And Byron obviously was inspired by Ian Gillan. So around the same time, there was a German band that had been through a ton of iterations. One was called Pink Mice, where they did renditions of classical material. And then they became known as Hell Preachers Incorporated, and they did a heavy psych album called, I believe it's called Psychedelic Underground, and that is really a treasure. Now, the core members were, I believe, Dieter Horns on bass, and of course, let me get these guys' names straight. I kind of know them, but I'm afraid I'm going to mix them up, their names with each other. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to cheat, as I often do on here. I thought I was going to be able to avoid it, but I want to get the facts right, though, because this is important. Peter Hessline. He was the brainchild behind these early groups like the Hell Preachers Incorporated, and his original keyboardist, Peter Hecht. Who again, Peter Hecht played in this kind of organ style, a little John Lawton-ish, and a little bit, R&B soulish, kind of like their fellow countryman Frumpy was sort of semi-prog, semi-R&B, and their organists have that similar kind of vibe. A lot of people played with that sound back then. I mean, not just because of John Lord, but I mean, really also because of the jazz organists of the 60s who really put the Hammond B3 on the map, like Jimmy Smith and I forgot the guy's name, Young, something Young. Right? Oops. But definitely Jimmy Smith was a prominent one. He's one that comes to mind a bit, but there were quite a few who were incredible, who had that general kind of vibe, that soul jazz kind of vibe, sound. Lonnie Liston Smith was one. So yeah, I mean, rock was a little more eclectic than it later became during that period. There's a lot more cross-pollination and a lot more things that were more quote-unquote progressive, as in results of hybridization of genres became hits, commercial hits, Later on, rock became very stratified. Pop was ascendant, and of course, changed styles where now it's unrecognizable as what the top 40 was like in the mid 60s to say early 80s. Punk had somewhat to do with that, and new wave, and those were not bad influences at all. Um, the new wave era of top 40 pop is probably the last era where there was actually some, in my opinion, where there was some strong songwriting uh, in top 40 songs. I mean, there were other people who were dominating them who were extremely talented too, like Prince and David Bowie, of course. Um, but really, yeah, the new wave era. After the 80s, top 40 kind of changed, and in the thousands, everything really changed. And now it's almost kind of distorted beyond recognition. Uh, I'm It's like an unrecognizable genre to me. One magazine proclaimed that, it might have been Rolling Stone, proclaimed recently that the two top rock stars, rock musicians of 2020 were what's her name? Miley Cyrus, and I swear I want to say the other one's Justin Bieber. I hope I'm wrong. It's not that lame. Maybe somebody like that. But I just, it's come on. They play rock. I mean, and they don't have to play rock. I mean, it's just, why call them that? Why try to, because everybody co-ops the imagery. It's all about image and style over substance. So anyway, I've gone way, way off topic of what I'm trying to talk about. So anyway, the original URIAH HEEP with David Byron, Mick Fox, and Ken Hensley had a distinctive sound, though very derivative at times of Deep Purple, Manal Fudge, etc. David Byron left the band. Gary Thane became their kind of most well-known bassist. I think he was the guy from Keith Hartley Band. He died. I think it was drug related, and I think it's a case where he left the band and then died, kind of like Brian Jones and Tommy Bolin. When I was growing up, I thought Brian Jones died, and that's why he was replaced in the Stones. And I thought that, what's his name? I thought that Deep Purple broke up because Tommy Bolin died. But actually, people died after their time with the band was over. So it's interesting. Maybe not being in the band anymore led to their kind of almost suicidal decadence that killed them. But anyway, they finally got early on. URIAH HEEP got a great drummer called Lee Kerslake, and so that's kind of where they were in the mid 70s. Okay, so let's go back to this other German band. So there was Pink Mice, and then Hell Preachers Incorporated, and then they evolved into something called Asterix, named after the French comic strip character Asterix, of Asterix and Obelix, which took place in ancient Rome, I believe. Asterix brought in John Lawton. I don't know. I have not researched John Lawton's background prior to that. I mean, that's kind of where I'm headed now, is to really bone up on this guy. So this video is not for that purpose. It's really just to say what he did, what he achieved, what he meant to me, what I liked about his work, and what led to him coming to prominence. So I already covered the URIAH HEEP part, and here we are with Asterix, which became known as Lucifer's friend. And so their original lineup had Dieter Horns on bass, Peter Hesslein on guitar, and that other guy's name I keep forgetting, like a moron. Peter Hecht on keyboards. Original drummer was Joachim Riedenbach. He wasn't in the band a whole long time. He was their original. So they congealed in 1970. In 1971, they released a self-titled album called Lucifer's Friend. The lead track, first song on the album, and which became the most popular single from the album, was called Ride the Sky, sometimes incorrectly called Riding the Sky or Ride in the Sky, because the chorus uses all three variations. But the actual title, is Ride the Sky. And Lawton announced himself as a formidable vocalist. I mean, he was obviously a little influenced by Robert Plant, a little influenced maybe by Ian Gillan, though they were really just kind of contemporaries, but maybe. Definitely higher pitched wailing and screaming, but he also sang with a full range. I mean, he was great with ballads, he was great with blues, he was great with soul stuff. He had some deep, kind of gruff, evil sounding vocals, kind of like Dio did occasionally. Not to the extent of Dio and Sabbath, and not as much as you would think from a band called Lucifer's Friend. But this song, Red the Sky, really was kind of an archetypal heavy metal song. I mean, even the melody riff, which seems to be played on a horn of some kind, a French horn, a tuba, I don't know. It's the exact same as what Robert Plant later did vocally on Immigrant Song. So just imagine that if you haven't heard of this guy. I'm going to provide some links to some of the best Lawton stuff, or most representative Lawton stuff on YouTube. A few tracks, maybe an album or two. So yeah, I mean, that's an incredible album, and it is heavy guitars and heavy organ and keyboards. And Lawton just has a powerful voice, a powerful range. He was kind of lost in the shuffle back then. I mean, obviously, Lucifer's Friend had began as literally a krautrock band, as in a German band who played in Germany and who was rock, psychedelic, and experimental in all its incarnations. Lucifer's Friend was a little more of a polished, more commercial version, and definitely a more progressive rock style, in the same vein that at the same time I've already mentioned Deep Purple and URIAH Heep were going in. Occasionally, Lucifer's Friend and URIAH Heep sound a little bit alike on some of the early albums, especially when you factor in the John Lawton albums. Sometimes they sound similar, but Peter Hessline is a more adventurous guitarist than Mick Box. Mick Box is a really just reliable riff meister, and he has some cool solos, but Hessline could do pretty much anything on the guitar, electric or acoustic, and he was just a phenomenal talent, and he was obviously, in his mind anyway, the leader of the band. And obviously he saw John Lawton as kind of the co-founder, co-leader, along with Heck and Horns. But the band didn't keep this line forever. I mean, but they did do 5 albums. I think by the end of that span of albums, they had changed drummers. And possibly the last album had a different keyboardist than Joaquin. Lawton was in the group from 70 to 75. So after Lucifer's Friend, the self-titled album, they did one called Where the Groupies Killed the Blues, which, like in several of their albums, have their kind of weird mascot characters. This tall, strange man in a black trench coat and a black hat, and his friend who's kind of like a midget with a shaven head. I don't know what the significance of those characters are. I'm not sure if one or both of them are Lucifer's friends, like it's their characters, like Eddie and Iron Maiden, or my mascots. I just consider them mascots because they reappear even on the very last Lucifer's Friend album, which came out not that long ago, and I'll get to that eventually. So Where the Groupies Killed the Blues, I got at a record store, one I didn't often frequent. It was like $2 on vinyl. I don't know what year this was. Late 80s, around 89, 90. I was really getting a lot of early 70s hard rock then. I was getting into Lucifer, No Relation, Coven, and Dust, and this kind of stuff. And still love that stuff. And I've done a video on a good bit of that on this channel. So Where the Groupies Killed the Blues, when I first listened to it, I considered it kind of a little proggy, a little hard rock, a little blues rock. I was a little disappointed. I didn't think the vocals were as amazing as what I'd heard Lawton do in URIAH Heep. So I kind of shelved it for many years. It's only recently that I've really listened to it closely again, and I have a totally different feeling about it. I do think it's kind of a top-notch prog rock album, despite the humor or whimsy in the title of the album and those characters and one or two of the song titles. It's overall it's an intelligent and thoughtful and well-written album of its kind. It's not as aggressive as the self-titled album, so it's not as like groundbreaking. And actually, they're a weird band because they kind of changed their sound with every album. The next album they did, I believe, is called "I'm Just a Rock and Roll Singer," and it's a very strange cover. Um, and those were more conventional, kind of metallic kind of songs, but pop, blues, metal. I mean, they're good, and the vocals do get wild occasionally, like on the first album. I think that's the weakest of the 5 original albums they did with John Lawton. And then the next one is called Banquet. The Banquet, they went back to prog, and this prog again is like long, convoluted song arrangements and very kind of psychedelic, semi-philosophical, hippie era lyrics, kind of like URIAH, and kind of like a lot of people were writing back then in every genre of pop rock. It was almost idyllic utopian. It wasn't as dark as like the first album. The first album was almost like a proto doom metal album. It had a foreboding to it that fit the name of the group. By the time we get to Banquet, it's more of a relaxed, thing. And they look there like they had a table, the photo on the cover in a medieval setting at a banquet, and I think that's appropriate. There's that kind of mystique, that imagery, and again, I think there's where you have a slight connection also with Dio, as he was getting fond of that stuff right at the same time, transitioning from Elf to Rainbow, from that imagery. But some of that imagery is in the lyrics. I'm not sure how many of the lyrics John Lawton wrote and how many Hessline wrote, or otherwise. But Banquet is really a good album, and it's truly prog of 1974. It is really endemic of that year and that era, because not only does it have like the long kind of jazzy passages and trippy psychedelic stuff, but and interesting ornate arrangements, but it also has like a lot of R&B, soul, and funk influence, and jazz fusion influence. And of course, jazz fusion sucked up a ton of funk, R&B, and soul into its paradigm, its idiom, so to speak. Prog was not just classical music meets rock music, as occasionally some people still claim. It really was rock meeting various other genres head on and merging, like folk, like psychedelia, like classical, but also like jazz and like funk, R&B, and soul, and a lot of extent with the krautrock bands, kind of really trippy psychedelic music and early electronic music, because Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream both started as kind of psychedelic rock bands, and of course they both evolved into something very different and very different from each other. But Lucifer's Friend, like the Scorpions, firmly came out of the krautrock scene, milieu, and sound, but neither are considered krautrock because they're predominantly considered hard rock, heavy metal, and a lot of it is the crossover, the more pop-oriented songs. In Lucifer's Friend's case, the British lead vocalist singing in English. The Scorpions always sang in English also, but Klaus is German. But I definitely think they're both rooted in that era, and I like to see them as offshoots. That krautrock pushed out a lot of different kinds of things. I mean, Tangerine Dream is one kind of extreme, and the Scorpions is another kind of extreme, and then there's like Can and everything in the middle. Incredible stuff. So anyway, the fifth Lucifer's Friend record, Mind Exploding, had a cool title and cover, but despite what they implied, it didn't go back to the adventurous sound and lyrics of 3 of their prior albums, and it picked up more from I'm Just a Rock and Roll Singer, more conventional structures, more conventional heavy rock riffs. It's not bad, I guess that and I'm Just a Rock and Roll Singer are both very listenable albums, but they're not in the same league as Lucifer's Friend, where the Groupies killed the blues, and Banquet. So at this juncture, like I said, Byron's out of Freudian slip, out of URIAH, and John Lawton is in, and he was a great match. he kind of carried on a lot of his style from Lucifer's Friend, but he also kind of incorporated a little bit of David Byron's style. A little. I mean, they were both screamers early on, but Lawton is a stronger vocalist, in my opinion, with a wider range. And when I say range, I don't necessarily mean he can hit the very high notes Byron did at times, and certainly not Ian Gillan, but that's really irrelevant. I just mean range of influences, range of sounds, delivery, styles that he weaves in. There's a lot of soul in his, the stuff with Uriah Heep, it's kind of, even the rock stuff is a little more slowed down from Lucifer's Friend. The vocals are a little more prominent than they were on the last few Lucifer's Friend albums, because honestly, after the first album, Lawton was great, but he complemented the music. I don't think it's the other way around. Whereas in Uriah Heep, I mean, obviously Ken Hensley and Mick Box were writing a lot of the music, especially Ken Hensley, and Lawton helped write, and it became a little more commercial, a little more accessible, with still some hard rock kind of reputation, and hard rock kind of was how they were marketed. They weren't really prog at all anymore. They were doing a lot more ballads, and their rockers were getting a lot more kind of straight rock and roll. This was happening in the last couple of Byron albums, and I think those albums suffer as a result of that conventionality. But Lawton's voice was fresh, and but they dragged the same classic people back, with the Mick Box, Ken Hensley, Lee Kerslake on drums, and a guy who had recently become their permanent bass player, Trevor Boulder, who originated as the bassist for David Bowie, and he was one of the Spiders from Mars. He's the bassist on Ziggy Stardust, Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, and the Spiders from Mars. And he may have appeared on the Bowie album before that. I know he wasn't with him as long as Mick Watson or Woody Woodmansey. But anyway, so other than Bowie, he's mainly known as Uriah Heep's bassist for a very long time. And so they did 3 albums together, Innocent Victim, and now I'm finally going to get back to what I was saying 20 minutes ago. Hensley wrote 3 songs, Choices, Illusion, and The Dance, and they're all kind of long, moody, almost eerie, kind of psychedelic, very melodic kind of songs, contemplative lyrics. Again, we're getting back into that kind of philosophical rumination that Kent Hensley really was pushing on the first few albums. And Lawton's perfect for it. More than Byron. I really do think so. I mean, Byron had this kind of Baroque flourish to his sound and that flamboyance, but Lawton, like Ian Gillan, was a lot more focused and targeted, in control vocalist. I don't know, maybe he drank less. I don't know. I'm just kidding. I have no idea. I like David Byron a lot, don't get me wrong. But I do prefer John Lawton. Right? I'm not saying that the 3 albums John Lawton did with them were consistently as well written as the early albums of David Byron, because I don't think they were. The first 2 albums, Uriah Heep, or Very Heavy, Very Humble, and Salisbury, are to me really kind of their masterpieces. And then they kind of managed to leap into commercial hard rock from prog rock and hit at just the right time with Demons and Wizards and The Magician's Birthday, to where those kind of codified their sound that most people think of as the Uriah Heep sound. And then they just kind of kept blogging it from there. I'm not saying that some of the albums weren't good, and some of the songs certainly were great, especially when John Wetton was briefly in the group. But really, Lawton rejuvenated the group, at least creatively, and they did make a lot of TV appearances, in different countries, and promoting various songs from these albums. I don't think Innocent Victim was the first of the 3 albums, actually. Here's where I get off on my my timeline, but I do know that pretty sure I can get to this here. Okay. Firefly was the first. That was 1977. And then Innocent Victim came out later the same year, and Fallen Angel was 1978. That's what I remembered, was that Fallen Angel was the last of the 3 and the weakest, but also I confess the one I've listened to the least. I plan on revisiting the deluxe expanded edition pretty soon. I haven't listened to the expanded edition before, but it's on YouTube, and I'm going to check it out. I have been listening very heavily to Innocent Victim and Firefly. I think they're both fantastic albums. I do think Firefly was the first of the three, and really it does kind of come out of nowhere as far as the power of it with Lawton and the conviction of his vocals. And over those two albums, not only did they do those three kind of proggy songs on Innocent Victim, I love Wise Man is an absolute classic. Free Me, I mean, it's a love song, it's a pop love song, but it's so well written and so well delivered in its vein, in its genre. Um, those are two that come to mind, Free Me and Wise Man, but there's another one I'm forget. Been Away Too Long. It's amazing. So, I really like that period. I didn't think I would still like that stuff at this age when I got here, but or I'd be revisiting John Lawton in a serious mode. But I never really finished exploring Lucifer's Friend years ago. I downloaded the Lawton albums in the last several years, and I listened to them, and then I kind of put them aside. But now I'm listening to them a little deeper, and I'm listening to the stuff without Lawton. He was replaced by a cat named Michael Starrs, Starrs, who was a very bizarre mannered, also very flamboyant kind of front man. He was from Coliseum 2, I believe, yeah, which was an incredible group with Gary Moore and Don Airey and John Heisman. Or maybe he was from the original Coliseum. No, I think he was from Coliseum too. Very important group. Neil Murray also was in the group briefly. I'll talk about them in some other video because I think they're kind of an overlooked group. To me, they're in the same vein sonically as Mahavishnu Orchestra and the Jeff Beck group in the 70s. Very similar, Coliseum too. Anyway, so I don't know why John Lawton left. I didn't keep up with any of this. And of course, it took me years to even hear the next album without him, with John Sloman on lead vocals and some keyboards, called Conquest. And Conquest was very funky. It was definitely an attempt to update the sound, and I actually like it. A lot of people despise it. And then they went into kind of this AOR metal, because then Ken Hensley left. And Mick Box kind of took over the group, and he and Kerslake and Boulder kind of soldered on with different vocalists and keyboardists. Briefly, Trevor Boulder left, and Lee Kerslake's bandmate from the Blizzard of Oz, Ozzy Osbourne band, Bob Daisley, appears on 2 albums. Unfortunately, most of those 2 albums, a big chunk of those 2 URIAH HEEP albums are covers. Some are quite excellent covers. And Daisley didn't bring to URIAH HEEP what he brought to Ozzy or later to Black Sabbath, which was just his own original great lyrics. On one of those 2 albums, Abominog, there's a song called That's the Way That It Is, which was like their radio hit or video hit. That's a great song, but I found it was also a cover. It took me years to learn that. And the original's interesting. It's different. I wouldn't call it heepish or anything. They kind of put a spin on it. But the one that really always impresses me is Lonely Nights, which had been written by Bryan Adams and originally recorded as a single early in his career when he was more writing for other people and trying to make it as a performer. But the first prominent recording that more than a small amount of people heard was URIAH HEEP's version, and to me, it's far, far better than his version. But it also underlines the strengths of how well written a pop song it is. And then, of course, Bryan Adams re-recorded it a year or 2 later, and it became a gigantic hit for him. Again, that's one of those I heard at the time it was popular. And it was a few years before I heard Abominog and I heard that version. I was kind of surprised and a little bemused and befuddled, and then ultimately kind of delighted. I like that one a lot. So I do like some cheesy music, So URIAH HEEP went on their way. That was Peter Golby was their singer by then, and then later they went a million different directions. But Boulder, Box, and Kerslake stayed the core until the 2000s when they all started kind of dying off. But also in the 2000s, Ken Hensley started playing shows again with them, and so did John Lawton. And John Lawton and Ken Hensley began playing shows together. John Lawton had his own group, and also there was a Hensley Lawton band, which mainly played URIAH HEEP songs. So I've seen a number of those videos. After being out of the, spotlight for a while, John Lawton, he's an interesting guy. I mean, he always had kind of a receding hairline, and another way he's kind of like Dio, and I guess me now is as he got older, his hair got curlier and wilder, and so yeah, I guess I have that may be a cancer moonchild thing too for this week of cancer. Um, but it was kind of like in Lucifer's Friend, it was kind of sort of long, but kind of rather dense and curly. It might have been permed, I don't know. It probably was, but by the time he got URIAH, he'd lost a bit more of it right in here, kind of like mine is now. But it was really fuzzy, like an afro kind of, and not as long here, but definitely bigger, thicker, wider. And I liked that look. And he would often paint his eyes with this kind of glam makeup, and he'd wear his these shirts that were open down to his navel with his hairy chest showing all these amulets and medallions and bangles and jewelry and bracelets and tight black leather pants and some really cool black shoes. He had quite an interesting look in those video appearances that I've seen of him in that period. I think he really came into his own as kind of a rock star during the HEEP era. I do want to flash back one more time, though, before I get into where the 2000s and where we're at now with this unfortunate news. In the mid 70s, Roger Glover of Deep Purple wrote a concept album based on a children's book, and it's called The Butterfly Ball and the Grasshopper's Feast. I think that's the name of the book. I should know by now. But anyway, he did an album, a concept album based on this whimsical kids' fantasy book with anthropomorphic animals, characters. And he called the album The Butterfly Ball. And Deep Purple was kind of on the edge of breaking up. I think we were in the Glenn Hughes, David Coverdale era. I'm not even sure if Blackmore was still in the band. The first Rainbow album may have already come out. But Dio and Elf had toured extensively opening for Deep Purple. And so Dio became Blackmore's choice as vocalist when he started Rainbow. But before that, Dio had worked with these guys professionally too, and mainly on this album. He did the single from the album called Love Is All. We're talking about Ronnie James Dio. It was incredible. Nobody knew who he was back then. Nobody had any clue who he was. And I'm not saying it was even a hit single, but they made an animated video. It made a movie. The movie is a combination of animated videos for the songs and live action with really kind of cheesy, cheap outfits of these fantasy characters, and then live footage of group playing. And it was like a super group. I mean, on the album, Glover had used Coverdale and Hughes on vocals. He used Tony Ashton. He used Ronnie James Dio. He'd used Twiggy, of all people, to sing. And finally, for vocals, he had John Lawton. And John Lawton sang this beautiful song called Little Chalk Blue. Well, in the movie, Lawton did Little Chalk Blue, but when they filmed the movie, Ronnie Dio wasn't available. I think that was because he was on the first Rainbow tour, I believe. So his songs had to be covered. And here's where you get into some really weird irony with how all these groups are incestuous. His great song, Love Is All, which was the one I mentioned with the video, where you had Froggy. He's like the main character. He's like a guitar playing frog, talking frog. And by the way, Vincent Price narrated this movie. So imagining Vincent Price, and he's like, Froggy went on a journey. I mean, I can't do Vincent Price, but, this baleful, foreboding vocal, and he was doing Welcome to My Nightmare then, and, he later did Michael Jackson. I mean, Vincent Price was kind of the go-to guy for the menacing voice intros, to the extent where when Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast came out, people swore to me that was Vincent Price at the beginning, saying, "Woe to you, O earth and sea." It's not Vincent Price, but it obviously is along those lines, influenced by that vibe. Great song, by the way, great album. So yes, Love Is All was sung by John Lawton, and then when there was a reprise of it at the end, John Lawton traded off verses with David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes, and Twiggy as doing prominent backup vocals. So that was interesting. And Coverdale's vocals are really deep, bluesy, and aggressive, and I don't know. I mean, I think he was rather intoxicated at that show. Everyone was having a good time, and that's kind of what the Butterfly Ball was about. Clover's tapping into, he's using rock and all these musicians he knows to kind of create this festive kind of album and movie and concert where they film parts of the movie. And it works. It's just weird and odd enough and unique enough that really works. Bear in mind, Roger Glover wrote all the music for this album. So he didn't just play bass. You know, he also played guitar and he also wrote lyrics. And of course, he wrote. I think he wrote all the lyrics on the album. I may be wrong, but Dio and Lawton did not write their lyrics, for instance. And of course, years later, Deep Purple with Ronnie guesting in 2000 at a couple of shows did Love Is All. And the other song was Sitting in a Dream. I just want to say real quick, he's not much in the movie or in the show, but Sitting in a Dream on the album was sang by Ronnie James Dio. In the movie, it was sung by Ian Gillan, who at that time was kind of in semi-retirement, putting together the Ian Gillan Band, which was really a jazz fusion group, not a heavy metal hard rock group. Great band, which he later formed Gillan, which is more heavy metal. But Gillan, you know, of course, he starred in Jesus Christ Superstar. To me, Gillan is a genius. You know, a great songwriter, a great vocalist. You know, absolutely indispensable influence on heavy music as a vocalist and as a writer, and dare say as a lyricist. And yeah, Gillan's the man. But you know, Gillan covers Dio, which is funny because years later when he joined Black Sabbath, he covered some Dio songs like Heaven and Hell, Neon Nights, and what's the other one? Heaven and Hell, Neon Nights. Those might be the only two. Okay, but that was still cool. He did great versions of those two. I kept wanting to say Mob Rules, but he didn't. But I would have loved to hear Gillan scream at the beginning of Mob Rules for Ronnie Scream. So come on. So that was a little point there where John Lawton directly, you know, he covered Dio and he directly interfaced, and Glover heard the similarity in their vocals, and of course Glover probably knew their birthday was a day apart and probably highly regarded both of them. Again, this was before he joined URIAH. This was coming off. He was either had just left Lucifer's Friend or was about to be Lucifer's Friend. So, flash forward, and he's done these different shows. And studio-wise, I haven't paid a lot of attention to what he may have recorded until I realized that Lucifer's Friend had regrouped with him twice. Once in the mid-90s, they did an album called Sumo Grip, and they reunited with him in the mid-80s, and had an album called, or early 80s, and had an album called Mean Machine. Mean Machine is a big step down from the earlier Lawton albums. It is even more kind of straight-ahead conventional hard rock of the period. Not awful, you know, listenable, but not remarkable. But years later, 1996, Hessline and Lawton teamed up, and they reformed Lucifer's Friend as Lucifer's Friend 2, and were the co-leaders. None of the other members original members or prominent earlier members are on those albums. However, the keyboardists on that album did later become their keyboardists when they reformed, because Peter Hecht never returned to the band, even though he'd been such a key part of their sound originally. But anyway, Sumo Grip is pleasant listening. It's kind of surprising in a way that, once again, they tried something different. And in this case, it was kind of like metal power ballads, a lot of which sounded very 80s, but this came out in 1996. So plopping this right in the middle of the grunge era and you know, Hipsterville, and here you have this album called Lucifer's Friend 2, Sumo Grip, with these sumo wrestlers on the cover. You know, of course, it disappeared in a heartbeat, but it's a pretty fun album. It's kind of a novelty. I don't think it's one of their best creations, but I do think they were good at that style. And I'm not a huge fan of that style, but I mean, there are some songs that I love, and obviously Black Sabbath, No Stranger to Love, I can't get enough of. And there's a few others from that period of 80s pop metal. But at the time, I hated that music, and I'm not much more fond of it now, but I do have some grudging respect in hindsight for some of it in the context of its time I mean, I'm not going to run out and, start downloading Cinderella and Poison and everything off of YouTube. I have friends who do, but that's never going to be me. Not every rose does have a thorn. So anyway, John Lawton and Hessline kind of went this way again. And then they kind of formed a more lasting partnership in the 2000s. And they did an album called, see if I can almost remember this album. It is called, they did one called Awakening, which I have yet to find, in 2015. And by this point, these two guys, and their original bass player rejoined, Dieter Horn. He's on all the albums except for that Sumo Grip. And the keyboard is from Sumo Grip and some other drummer. It's like a revolving drum stool. But anyway, that lineup did Awakening, which I've yet to hear. But then they did an album called Too Late to Hate, and it's quite good. Lawton's voice, much to be expected. He was 2016. He was 70. He was 69 or 70 when he recorded the album. And bear in mind, Dio recorded his last album with Black Sabbath under the title Heaven and Hell, The Devil You Know, when he was about 67, 66 or 67 years old. Yeah, I guess 67. So, same thing with Lawton from that period. He's singing much deeper, not as many highs, not the kind of highs that are on the first Lucifer's Friend, where he's outplanting Robert Plant easily. And but he has a charm. It's still his voice. It has a lot of character. The lyrics, I don't know which of these guys wrote the lyrics, but the lyrics are kind of in the vein of Ken Hensley's URIAH HEEP stuff, believe it or not. It's kind of hearkening back to the Banquet album of Lucifer's Friend, where you have more kind of fantasy, kind of somewhat literate, semi-philosophical, semi-dark heavy metal lyrics, with optimism and utopianism. And it was wonderful to hear that again. In 2016, John Lawton singing those kind of lyrics with Peter Hessline and Dieter Horn. So that was a joy. And even better was 2019 album called Black Moon. Because not only did that have all those qualities, but the songwriting was tighter, the hooks were stronger, more memorable, I guess you could say. And on both albums, the playing, especially the guitar playing, just as can be expected if you've heard Peter Hessline, is just phenomenal. I mean, it's like he's kept up with all the heavy music since Lucifer's Friend, and he's there with them, and he says, "Hey, man, I'm going to go light years ahead of them." I'm not saying he goes into new innovative genres like atmospheric black metal or anything, but he sounds beyond modern. He still sounds ahead of his time. He's a master not only of playing but of sound, of the studio effects. And him and Lawton are good foils for each other, and Horn is good for. So I'm sad that the death of Ken Hensley in 2020 ended the jams with URIAH HEEP and ended the Hensley Lawton band for good. And I'm very sad that John Lawton's passing on June 29th of 2021 ended Lucifer's Friend completely unexpected comeback run, which has been creatively very nice. I'm not going to say it's brilliant, not in the league of the old stuff, not quite in the league of the URIAH HEEP stuff with Lawton, though some of it is. Not Lawton's best vocals, in some ways his weakest, but I don't know if he wrote the lyrics or not, but it's his best delivery, among his best delivery of lyrics. Very heartfelt, yet also kind of winking and nudging, that these are kind of rock cliches, or were back during the early 70s. And he's kind of dragging them into the modern day with Hessline and Horn. So really impressed with the last two Lucifer's Friends album. They're a great legacy for John Lawton. I've seen some live shows of him coming up to 2019. And his voice, was getting a little weaker. I have not seen Lucifer's Friend play on the Black Moon tour. I'm not sure how that went, but I do plan to seek it out and find out. I'm also going to research this guy's life and find out just how much of a cancer moonchild he was. And was he even more like Ronnie Dio? I don't know. I mean, and what he wrote lyric-wise. but he's generally almost always had an authenticity and a sincerity to his vocals, and it's time to reappreciate the guy, and probably was anyway, but I had no idea Lucifer's Friend. I knew they'd done some gigs in the 2010s, but I had no idea they'd reformed and done 3 albums, much less 2 good albums. And so, Lawton's left a rich legacy, mainly with 2 bands, but also with other stuff, Asterisk and Asterix, and Hensley Lawton Band, the John Lawton Band, and then some other groups probably he's been in on and off. I have no idea. So rest in peace, Mr. John Lawton, and though I am a day late, happy birthday to a July 19th. I'm sorry. Happy birthday to a July 11th Moonchild Cancer. Another one who had a birthday yesterday was Katie Halper, who kind of dovetails with some of my other interests in politics because she's kind of a comedian slash fearless leftist commentator on YouTube. She has her own channel, Katie Halper Show. You should check it out. But she's also really beautiful and really intellectual and cool. She had a July 11th birthday. Happy birthday to her. Happy birthday to Dio on July 11th, late birthday. Happy birthday to Tura Satana was July 10th. Happy birthday to me, July 10th. And happy birthday to Tura Satana, July 10th. Lee Morgan, the jazz trumpeter. George Clayton Johnson, co-writer of Logan's Run, who I did know personally and hung out with a good bit. We chilled at the San Diego Con in 2006, and he smoked weed right out in plain sight. And I'm not sure if weed was legal in California in 2006. Maybe. But I don't know. He was a trip. He was a great guy. He and I, again, we're a lot alike. So I can see we're born on the same birthday, temperament-wise. So anyway, happy birthday a day late to John Lawton. Rest in peace, John Lawton. Died suddenly on June 29th. No one knew about it until about the 7th. And no one has revealed what it's about, how he died. So, regardless of the mysteries, you will be missed. And, stuff like Wise Man, Choices, Illusion, Ride the Sky. I mean, this stuff is going to echo in my brain for all time, and in a lot of people's. So thank you for giving us this legacy of music, John Lawton. I didn't mean to do more than a half-hour video on you, and I talked about a lot of other people too, but I was, again, I'm on tangent. So take care.